Ahead and get started. My name is John Davies, and I'm the director of the McKenzie River Men's Center. Thank you all for coming tonight and to address what we as a community can do to prevent domestic violence. And I want to begin by acknowledging the contributions of two organizations here in town who have been helping out survivors of intimate partner violence for many, many years and helping make Eugene and Lane County a safer place. And that is Womenspace and SASS, Sexual Assault Support Services. They both were instrumental in organizing this event tonight, and we greatly appreciate their help. But even more than that, we greatly appreciate all the help they've done to the community for I don't know how many years have Womenspace been in existence? I mean,
40 years, right, Brandy?
Yeah, 40-some years. I think SASS is probably about the same. Is that right, Martina?
We'll be celebrating our 30th anniversary this year, actually. We came about in 1991, so we might have to have a party. I don't know.
Great. Well, fantastic. I just really want to acknowledge those two groups here and stuff. We have a great lineup of speakers and panelists here today. And also small group leaders and activities to kind of explore our different aspects of domestic violence. The McKenzie River Men's Center is hosting this event along with our mother organization, which is the Center for Community Counseling, which is where Debbie is our executive director. Then we're also being sponsored tonight by the Eugene branch of the Pacific University, their Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. And representing that committee is one of their professors, Dr. Lalit Khandare from Pacific, who'd like to say a few welcoming words. So Lalit.
Thank you so much, John. So welcome everyone. This is quite interesting time in the history where we are like stuck with this COVID and a lot of difficult situation especially in Northwest, which has been impacting the issues around interpersonal violence. So myself, I've been teaching and engaging in this area of research of domestic violence, focusing on South Asian women. For my PhD, and also I teach courses around that in Masters in Social Work program at Pacific University here in Eugene. And some of the classes I invited John to come and teach in my class, and this is, I really get inspired by his energy. I think every year his energy level is going up and up. So so it is so motivational, and I think I'm quite impressed with the work of the agencies here in our town, Womenspace, and the Sexual Assault Support Services, McKenzie River Men's Support, also University of Oregon work around trauma and betrayal,
yes,
a lot
absolutely.
of those. And I think everyone here may have some or other kind of engagement addressing these issues. So we greatly admire that you came at this evening hour to join, and I really appreciate. We need more and more men to address this issue. So I, again, quite inspired by John on his leadership role. So thank you so much. And now I request John to take over.
Okay. Thank you so much, Lalit. So there's a couple of things I wanted to say about just things in general here before we get started. There's kind of three takeaways that I'd like each one of you to think about. We obviously know that domestic violence is a very serious problem in our world, our country, and this community. And we really need to be working together to be able to reduce it. And it's too lonely and too isolating a work to try to do that independently and siloed. We must come together and work as a team. Community members, agencies, organizations, psychologists, counselors, therapists, all of us pulling together to really help solve this very, very serious problem. And when we think about domestic violence, it's not just about it's not just about partners, but it's about the kids too. And we think about those kids out there, and they're our future. We want to make sure that they have a safe place to grow up, just like we all deserve to have a safety in our lives. So that's the first concern, is just recognizing that domestic violence is a serious problem in our area. The second thing I hope you take away is that the COVID pandemic is making this harmful epidemic of domestic violence worse. And since we're in the middle of this pandemic, we need to find ways to cope with that, to help alleviate the even added stress and other emotions and feelings that are going to get raised with dealing with the virus, which is going to affect and is already affecting domestic violence in our community and in our world. Right after COVID hit, the places all over the world reported upticks in calls to police and calls to social service agencies like Womenspace. So this is really an important issue. The third thing I'd like you to take away tonight is that it doesn't have to be this way. There is nothing written anywhere which says that there must be domestic violence in our communities. Nobody ordained that. There's no higher power which is saying there must be domestic violence in our communities. We do not have to live with domestic violence. There are some things that we can do to reduce it. And yes, it's a terrible thing. And yes, it's terrible that there's survivors out there who are having to deal and have had to deal with this trauma. But through our actions, we can reduce it. And we must continue to believe that, because if we don't, our motivation is going to wane and we're going to burn out and get tired and become complacent. So with those three things in mind, those are my three things that I hope you take away from tonight, broad picture. But let's go ahead and move into our presentation with Gwyn and with Gwyn and with Brani from Womenspace, giving us kind of an overview of domestic violence. And Brani, thank you, and welcome to you as well. And
thank you, John, for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to have you with us tonight. We are from Womenspace. My name is Gwyn Yukon. I'm specifically the University of Oregon domestic violence legal advocate located at the legal clinic there. And I also am helping with some Zoom administrative things tonight, so bear with me if we have a technical problem. And my pronouns are she, her, hers.
My name is Brani Yanez, and I'm the Development and Communications Coordinator at Womenspace. I wanted to thank everybody, like John said, for joining us. I know that the world around us has changed. The way we connect has changed. The way we talk to each other has changed. I mean, maybe we would be meeting in a giant conference room and having this discussion, but we've adjusted how we live our lives, and it finds us here in our Zoom meeting today. So I wanted everybody to know in this meeting how much I appreciate for everybody taking time out of their 6 o'clock hour when we might be eating dinner to talk about something that impacts not only our community, but each one of us individually. And so for those of you who may not know about Womenspace, I'm sure that you do, but we've been providing safety, hope, and healing to our survivors in our community now for over 40 years. It doesn't matter your gender, your sexual orientation, your economic status, your race. Everybody deserves to live a life free of violence. And that's our hope, going forward. And like John said, there's nothing written that says that in the rule book, we have to experience domestic violence. Our neighbors have to experience domestic violence. So I am grateful and glad that we are all here. And I'm excited to share some of the information with you today about what we do. So what is domestic violence? I know that for some of us, it looks like that typical battered woman that photo that we all have in our minds of a woman with a bruised eye. But it goes beyond that. It goes way beyond that. So beyond that typically battered woman face, it especially looks different in intimate partners. So on our next slide, we're going to discuss a few ways of what domestic violence looks like, especially to us as advocates, and what we see in our community. And you'll probably be surprised of what violence actually is.
So as Brani mentioned, we're specifically focusing on intimate partner violence. Domestic violence can occur and does occur between family members, but we focus on that intimate partner dynamic. And while there are many forms of abuse, they all are focused on power and control, and how can you gain power and how can you control your partner. So these are some forms of abuse and some tactics that abusers may use to control their partner. And we talk about physical, that's the first one that most people think of, and it's more than punching and strangulation. Of course, those are severe physical abuses that take place, but it could be more subtle. It could be threats of physical harm. It could be blocking a doorway so someone is not able to move. That's physically restraining and physically abusing someone as well.
The next one is verbal. Verbal abuse is when somebody uses words to demean, frighten, or control somebody. So name calling, blame, threats, saying things like "you idiot" after maybe making a mistake. Or if you really loved me, you wouldn't say that. And a big one that we hear is, if you don't stay with me, then I'm going to kill myself. And those are very strong words to say, and oftentimes that might even be shocking to hear, but those are things that are said in an abusive relationship every day.
And that verbal abuse directly ties to emotional abuse. That verbal belittling and name calling can really emotionally tear a person down and cause them to feel worthless. And another form of emotional abuse could be threats of emotional harm. So for example, maybe there are two people together, they're in a relationship with someone of the same sex, and they have not yet told their family about their sexuality, and their partner is saying, if you don't do this, I'm going to tell your family you're gay, or I'm going to do this. So threats to out them, that's an emotional harm and can be very devastating for someone.
And another form of abuse is sexual abuse. So in an intimate partner violent relationship, this doesn't always look like that typical sexual assault that we all hear on the news. It's not that random assailant that is oftentimes, in the newspapers. It's being coerced into sex when you're not willing to. It's using sex for favors as a bartering tool, and forceful sex. Sex acts that the partner might not necessarily be okay with, but in their mind, what is the alternative? And so not having that consent in the actions that may occur is also a form of abuse.
Economic and financial abuse is a great power and control tactic because money brings resources. And if someone's trying to leave and they have no money, it's just an extra barrier. And it's also a way to control someone. It can look like forcing them to work when they weren't planning on it, or not allowing them to work when they would hope to do so, stealing their earnings, or controlling access to finances and food. It can take any form, and it has devastating effects on family members.
The next one is technological abuse. So technology facilitated abuse is a form of controlling behavior that involves technology, and it means and it has a means to coerce, stalk, or harass somebody. So some of the ways that us as advocates see this occur is somebody might be installing tracking apps on their phone. It's sending abusive text messages, blasting text messages or conversations across social medias in a way that makes it harmful for somebody, to move forward. And also sharing intimate photos. That's a huge form of abuse that we often see. Just because you consented to send somebody maybe a nude photo doesn't mean that everybody in their friend circle was consented to be able to receive that photo. So that's that form of abuse.
Spiritual abuse is one that's often not talked about, and it can be subtle. For many people, their spirituality or their faith is a core part of who they are, and belittling that or denying that for someone is a form of abuse. It can be not allowing them to practice their faith or forcing them to practice a faith in a different way, or their spirituality in general, belittling it and causing harm.
And lastly, reproductive abuse. So what does that look like? So when a person tries to control your reproductive choices in order to control your life. So forcing a sexual partner not to use birth control, including a condom or other contraceptives, intentionally exposing a person to an STD. Maybe that means birth control sabotage, pregnancy pressure, or even termination of a pregnancy are all forms of sexual and reproductive abuse.
Okay, now we know a little bit more about abuse. How common is it? So this is national statistics, and these data come from the CDC and the Justice Bureau. Keep in mind that they are self-reported numbers, and you may see different data out there, but for the sake of this presentation, we'll focus on physical violence from an intimate partner occurs in nearly 1 in 4 women in their lifetime and 1 in 10 men. Again, I believe that number is much higher, but it is self-reported data. And then 1 in 5 women and 1 in 12 men experience unwanted sexual contact and sexual violence from an intimate partner. And then 10% of women and 2% of men report stalking from an intimate partner.
And next is just a slide that I won't spend too much time on. So if you have any questions, I encourage everyone to reach out. But in 2008, you can see that we took 5,000 crisis line calls. And we drew some numbers just from March 13th to June 30th, just in the, well, I believe we're probably going to be seeing a second pandemic, but in the height of when people were most concerned, right before school started for a lot of kids, we were able to assist 2,253 people over our crisis line. And so that's in that 3-month time, we were able to, receive and help with half the amount of calls that we saw in 2018. And that's alarming. And following that, we were able to assist with 45 safe housings. So you can kind of see where the numbers are shifted in 2020, how much need was especially provided in those 3 months. And early on in this pandemic, it was incredibly important for us as advocates and us as an organization to use some really good thinking skills and figure out ways for survivors, families, providers to be able to connect with an advocate and really be able to receive this resource hub of information that Womenspace advocates are generally providing when folks come in and visit us in person. And so we developed a web chat where we, in this 3-month time, were able to assist almost 300 survivors in a safe, secure way. And so when I say safe and secure way, that means that if somebody were to enter our chat room on our Womenspace webpage, they would be able to connect with somebody like me. I answer web chats, and I would be able to connect them with community organizations, resources, basic needs, or other safe housing. And if their abuser were to walk into the room, because most of us were still isolated in our homes, they'd be able to quickly exit, and any search history or record of them talking to an advocate would be immediately erased.
So it can be alarming talking about this subject and seeing the local and national data. And you might wonder, what can I do? How can I be part of the solution? In the evening, we'll cover more, but just to get your mind thinking. First, our thought is being a safe person for disclosure. So what that means is if your friend or family member discloses to you that their partner is abusing them in some way, you respond in an appropriate way. So that looks like listening, expressing empathy, and then respecting survivor autonomy. So a lot of things that survivors do don't make sense from the outside looking in, and you may wonder, well, why didn't they just leave? Why did they do this? But keeping those thoughts in your head and simply saying, I'm here, how can I support you? I support your decisions, because they've had their power taken away in this relationship, and you can help give them some power by respecting their choices.
And once you realize that domestic violence is more than physical violence, you can help disrupt forms of abuse by being your own agents of change. And when I say being your own agents of change, I mean not being a bystander. Intervening when it's safe to do so. Of course, at Womenspace, we never want somebody to intervene in a violent situation. But you know, in isolation, especially for a lot of us, we need folks to check in on us. And if you're experiencing violence in your own homes, we need somebody to check in with us even more. So that means checking on your neighbors and friends. I mean, we are all part of this community, especially when we're educating ourselves right now surrounding racial issues. It's such an important and impactful time to educate ourselves on how to be better stewards of our community, especially for survivors.
If you or someone you know or love is experiencing abuse, know that there are resources. We have the Womenspace Crisis Line here. It's 24 hours. You can also go to the website and utilize the web chat. It's answered by trained advocates. And then if you have follow-up questions or you're interested in resources to learn more, you are welcome to email us. This is Brandy's email and then my email here. And then Brandy will talk a little bit about donations.
So essentially, what's really important for me is to make impact in my community, not only with the work that I do, but just for myself as a human being. And I know volunteerism has left me feeling isolated, even in my own self. So there are things that people can do. Of course, we aren't utilizing Womenspace volunteers as much as we used to just because of our COVID environment, but I encourage everyone to check out our social media pages as we have current campaigns, appeals, and you know, different supply drives. And even if it's just in a very small way, any way that you can help impact a survivor's life plants that seed of hope and sense of community that I think that we all need. You know, it's a beautiful thing to see a child receive a small gift when maybe that means that they wouldn't have been able to get anything for, you know, that birthday, or receiving that little piece of hope. Especially for me as an abuse survivor as a child, it brought a sense of humanity and hope to my own life. And so planting those seeds are important. And I'm glad that we were able to come today and be able to talk to you about a little bit about the work that we do. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that, Brandi and Gwyn. Thank you. That was a very nice overview. Let's yeah, and I think you really kind of captured the scope of domestic violence. Oftentimes we think of domestic violence as a rather narrow area, but you really kind of hit on all the different areas in which this type of abuse can occur, and I greatly appreciate that. Thank you very much. Well, let's go ahead and move on. Our next presenter is Alexis Adam Clark, and she'll be talking about domestic violence and COVID in the time and relating that to betrayal trauma theory. So,
okie dokie. Can everyone see that? Okay. Okay, everyone sees that good? Yay. Okay.
Yeah, yes,
I love
yes.
when technology works. All right. And my internet's sometimes a little funky, so feel free to chat me or something if I break up, and I'll switch internet or audio or something like that. Anyway, so yeah, I thought that was an awesome introduction to domestic violence. Thank you all so much. So I'm just going to be talking really briefly about using a betrayal trauma lens to understand not only domestic violence, but domestic violence within the context of COVID-19. And I'll explain a little bit about what betrayal trauma is. So one, I'm a grad student, a doctoral student in clinical psychology at the U of O, and I work with Jennifer Fried, who kind of pioneered the topic of betrayal trauma. So I'll try to give you all a brief overview in the next 10 or 15 minutes. So why is betrayal trauma useful to understanding not only domestic violence, but also kind of any type of interpersonal trauma? So thinking from a, psychology lens is how do we conceptualize traumatic experiences? And largely throughout history, when we think of trauma, just kind of when we think of DV as well, our mind goes to these really specific instances of trauma that, are widely portrayed as these really terrifying traumatic events like war combat or an accident. And, slowly but surely, people really started to recognize the really unique traumatic effects of interpersonal violence on women and men's daily life. So slowly but surely, this concept of interpersonal trauma slowly gained headway in the, at least psychological world. And Jennifer Fried proposed this conceptualization of traumatic experiences as existing on two domains and two continuum. And these continuum include the extent to which an event is really terrorizing and fear-inducing, and also the extent to which it involves some degree of social betrayal, which is kind of this new element that's often under-recognized. So we think of that, this terrorizing and fear-inducing element, like, yeah, of course that's trauma. And also, there is an element of social betrayal in a lot of traumas that can be really distinct and impactful. So take a look at this kind of very busy 4x4 chart, and that's totally fine if it doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm going to try to go through it. But essentially, what betrayal trauma theory posits is that traumatic events exist in one of these four quadrants. Events that involve high terror, high fear, that really activate those fear centers of our body and get all revved up. Ones that, may or may not involve social betrayal. So we can look at this bottom right-hand quadrant and like, oh yeah, these are some terrifying traumatic events that don't really involve a ton of other people or a ton of other possible betrayals by other people, like a hurricane and auto accidents. Again, traumatic events, but lacking in kind of that social element. Then there's some forms of trauma that are really terrorizing and fear-inducing and also involve this really significant element of betrayal by another person, especially one that one might be dependent on and have a ton of trust in. This might be, really severe abuse by a caregiver, especially if it's a child. This could be whole communities being betrayed by overarching governmental systems, like in genocide, like the Holocaust. And also, there's also this quadrant of traumatic events that exist in this top left-hand corner that can be really fearful sometimes. And often they involve little instances that on their own aren't super fearful, but involve a ton of social betrayal, which can even include sex abuse if you're thinking of adults grooming children. And yes, they may be confused, but they might not exhibit the same terror response. And same with some kind of emotional abuse. Yes, maybe you don't have that same revved up, my life is in danger. And yes, it still involves this element of social betrayal that can be extremely impactful and lead to really, really harmful outcomes. So anyway, in summary, they posit that there's two domains of traumatic events. Not only does something have to be life-threatening and terrorizing, also it counts essentially if it involves the significant breach of trust by someone that you really, really have a lot of trust in and are dependent on for a lot of important resources. So why is that conceptualization helpful to understanding domestic violence and a lot of types of interpersonal violence? Because domestic violence is an example of a traumatic experience, again, involving some fear and terror depending on what's happening, but also involves the perpetrator being someone with whom usually the survivor is dependent on or has a ton of trust in. They have this sense that, oh, this person, you know, at times has really loved me, or if it's a caretaker, this person's taking care of me. I need this person in my life in order to get my needs met. And this is really critical because this puts a person in a really significant bind. Just, I think Gwyn mentioned that sometimes you know, people experiencing domestic violence might act in ways that don't quite appear like, oh, that's not what I would do in that situation. And we explain this in the betrayal trauma conceptualization, is that people are in a really difficult bind, because think about a child being abused by their caretaker. They can either disrupt the relationship, like the key relationship where that contributes to their survival, or they can stay in and cope and tolerate and experience additional abuse. And that's a really significant bind to be in, where either option is really, really poor. And because that's so significant, the brain will develop a lot of these adaptive responses to not only kind of protect someone from the pain of continued abuse, but to literally maintain their survival because of this really, really important relationship in which they're actually being betrayed. And betrayal trauma in particular, so those traumas that involve a really specific type of social betrayal, at least research has shown, and in our lab we studied this a lot, that these types of trauma not only lead to high levels of the same type of outcomes that these more kind of stereotypical fear-based traumas lead to, but in some instances are extremely exacerbate the negative outcomes. In particular, some of those outcomes, which again on the outside seem a little bit funky. This research actually got started by looking at, you know, forgotten abuse or distorted memories of abuse, and slowly but surely expanded its scope to not only looking at survivors of betrayal trauma and how their memory systems are actually disrupted in order to protect them from awareness of being abused, but also exacerbating symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of dissociation, symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, borderline personality disorder characteristics. Our research has shown again and again that even when accounting for the effects of some of these more terror or fear-induced traditional notions of trauma, like an accident or combat, even when kind of statistically controlling for those, this element of social betrayal adds these additional elements on top of already this existing pain. And I kind of mentioned this before, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit, but because of our human dependence on trust and other people to get our needs met, particularly when we're vulnerable as children, or we don't have access to the same financial resources, things like that. And what's really interesting to me is to think about this dynamic and this relationship within the unique context of COVID, which may actually be exacerbating. I don't have the data yet to support this, but to me, our theoretical framework suggests that this may be exacerbating these outcomes for several reasons. Because many of the strategies that are crucial to kind of ensuring our collective public health are also putting people at risk for increased domestic violence, and not only just remaining in the same space as someone and being confined to the house, but we're putting our trust in other people to ensure our health and our survival. And that not only puts us at risk for social betrayal, but it increases vulnerabilities a little bit inequitably for particularly vulnerable populations. So we're thinking of, especially in the context of DV, when we already have partners really staying in relationships because they're dependent on an abusive partner for financial resources or child care or, social support. We already have that dependence now because of, increased job loss and all these other things that have happened in the COVID. We're already kind of creating more and more dependence on potentially more dependence on potentially abusive partners. Again, dependence and trust are not inherently bad, but when we add kind of abuse into it, that's not a good recipe for potentially decreasing rates of DV. And I particularly think about the potential for someone in the same household who may have underlying health issues, and how another person potentially has the power to not only not follow COVID restrictions, but potentially put that person's health at risk. And essentially, like, they have the full capacity to betray them in this new way that we're still getting used to. So I'll be interested to we're conducting a kind of initial study on people's experiences of violence within the pandemic, but I'll be interested to see how this dynamic of increased dependence and trust plays out. And kind of as a concluding note, we've also expanded this notion of betrayal trauma to not only exist within interpersonal relationships, but also in larger institutional or even family contexts. So in addition to potentially being at risk for more domestic violence, we're also dealing with betrayal that may or may not be happening by larger organizations that we depend upon to protect us and to care about our well-being, that some of them are not doing so great at currently. So how much does this larger kind of societal betrayal a little bit by different organizations who are supposed to be keeping our health safe and making sure people are following these orders, especially because we have a lot of trust. We identify with a lot of our governmental agencies, our community agencies. And when they can't protect us from some of these things, then it's like, oh, that's adding on top of the interpersonal betrayal. So many levels of betrayal, and our research is just kind of expanding it out to see the larger and larger ripple effects of betrayal on higher and higher up throughout society. And then if you all are interested in this concept of betrayal trauma, and especially understanding and how it might be helpful for understanding outcomes of domestic violence, particularly in the COVID-19 times, I've put a couple of suggested readings up there for you, as well as just general articles about COVID-19 and domestic violence, which I'm sure you might get from other presentations as well. But a main book that's totally about betrayal trauma is Jennifer Fried and Pam Burrell's 2013 book, as well as there's a link to Jennifer Fried's website where she has a really great page just explaining betrayal trauma to the everyday person, and making sure that this idea about this, the harm of betrayal by someone you trust gets out there into the world. So feel free to chat me or email me if you're interested in learning a little bit more. And that's all I got.
Thank you so much, Alexis. That was very, very extremely interesting and thought-provoking. You know, I was thinking trust is the foundation of healthy relationships, and trust is the foundation of healthy communities and society. And when trust has been betrayed, as what happens in certain types of domestic violence and other types of violence, then we're actually undermining our ability to create healthy, not only healthy relationships, but healthy communities as well. Because so much of the way we connect with each other is built along our ability to trust. And as Alexis so succinctly pointed out, is that when trauma and certain types of trauma happens, and it's around betrayal trauma, that really erodes a person's sense of self and sense of trust in relationships. So thank you so much, Alexis. It's very, very interesting. I'm going to share my screen now, hopefully. I'm going to just talk a little bit more about, I'm going to talk about men's issues as related to domestic violence. You know, people of all genders experience domestic violence. Men vary according to their intersecting identities, sexual orientation, race, and cultural background. Men are involved with domestic violence, both in terms of being survivors of domestic violence and then also perpetrators of domestic violence. Male survivors start out, many males are abused in childhood or in their own interpersonal romantic relationships. They also can experience it in elder abuse later in life. A couple of things to keep in mind. One is, you know, keep in mind that men can also be survivors, but also most men are not violent. Yet most acts of domestic violence that result in serious injury are committed by men. So, so we need to think about that. And one of the reasons I get involved with this is because I certainly identified as being a man, and I feel a sense of responsibility since my gender creates some of the harmful abuse that occurs in our society. I feel a sense of responsibility being a man that I need to step up and do something about it to try to prevent it. So, you know, so we talked earlier about domestic violence being motivated often by a desire to be in control. But you know, I think we need to go beyond that and ask, so why do some men have a high need to be in control? Not all of us have a high need to be in control. Why do some men feel that? Well, for some of us, it's our socialization. Men in general are socialized that they should be tough and that they should be aggressive and be in control. So that's part of the script that many men, particularly American men, get when they're born and early on in their lives, is that we're socialized that we should be in control over things that happen to us. And when bad things happen to us, things that were out of our control, that we did something wrong as men. We didn't live up to our expectations of men as men if we were in a situation where we weren't in control. Then there's another thing that I think really kind of gets at people's desire to be in control, and that's underlying anxiety and fear. You know, men are taught to avoid dependency and are shamed for having dependency feelings.
Hey, John, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I've got a request from the audience that you put it in presenter mode. They're having a hard time reading the slides.
Okay.
So in the bottom,
how do I do that?
Bottom right corner, there's a little box by the 76%.
Is that it?
On that, nope, to the left of 76%. Keep going left.
Okay. Is that it?
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for interrupting me. Thank you. So oftentimes men are taught not to need anything from anybody. They're taught to be independent, and that dependency is something to be ashamed of. So the way most men, or many men, cope with this is they try to limit. We all need each other. We all need relationships, but they try to limit the amount of interpersonal relationships they have so that they're not dependent on a lot of people. And oftentimes, particularly traditional men, tend to become overly dependent on their significant other. And so what happens here is really a dilemma, because Because on the one hand, they're told you shouldn't need anything from anybody, yet they find themselves growing increasingly dependent on their particular partner. And this raises anxiety, and it raises guilt and shame, because men aren't supposed to need somebody. So my particular belief or take on this is that some men, to avoid admitting that they're experiencing dependency on their partner, will become angry or aggressive with a partner because they are making them feel dependent upon them. So it's kind of a projection on their part. So men's socialization is that they avoid taking care of themselves. So in traditional traditional men often rely on their partner to take care of their health needs and to remind them, oh, gee, you need to go see your doctor. You've got a health situation going on. And they limit the amount of people that they're allowed to be dependent on. And so they avoid help seeking. They want to be in control. They want to be aggressive. Certainly, our society encourages men and encourages messages of sexism and misogyny. Those messages are out there. They're in our media. They're in our music. And we see it role modeled from a lot of different places. So many men end up socially isolated and not feeling in control. And these things are particularly important in COVID, because what goes on during COVID is that men are cut off from the social relationships they do have. And they're also experiencing feelings of not being in control. They can't control the virus. They can't control much about that. So some men may feel emasculated due to job loss or to other downturns in the economy. They might be having increased anger or frustration. And spending increased time with partner and children, while it's great to have a certain amount of time, certainly, I don't know how many people in here have been spending too much time with partners or with close friends or with children, but I for myself find my ability to get irritated is often becomes stronger. I don't know how many people have found themselves becoming more irritable out in public. I'm a pretty easygoing guy, and I was in like about a month after the virus hit, and we were quarantining. I went out to the store, and it was a Sunday morning, and the store clerk was being very slow, and I had no place else to be. But my instinct on the way to cope with this slow cashier was I just wanted to scream at the person, and of course I did not do that. But I thought, this is really unusual. Here I'm normally very easygoing, have no place else to go. Yet I'm ready to scream at this guy for being slow and paying attention to each particular customer. So I don't know if anybody else has found themselves more short-tempered, either with loved ones or with partners or with children, but I think a lot of us are experiencing that type of thing. So cut off from traditional coping strategies. Again, some men are involved with greater alcohol and drug use during the virus. I've been talking to people that work in the marijuana industry, and sales are off the charts with marijuana. Also with alcohol, sales are very, very high. So lots of stuff are going on right now. So one of the things we do at the Men's Center is try to work on ways. First of all, we want to discourage ideas about men being overly independent and encourage the ideas of interdependence. And that is where people rely on each other. And that's what we really do in the groups, is we try to take that dependency that most often people rely on for one particular partner and spread that around. And a group is a very great way of doing that, because each one of us has something to learn from each other and something to give. And being a part of a group in which there's reciprocity, both giving and receiving, normalizes the help-seeking process and makes men feel more comfortable with being connected with others and asking for help. So one of the concepts we came up with, and you can think about this in terms of domestic violence and health and promoting healthy relationships, is the idea about possible masculinities, which involves promoting healthy masculine ideals. And these are masculine ideals that encourage men to become interdependent with each other and to reflect on what do our families and communities need from us as men? And we're going to be talking about this a little further on. But I think the original idea of gender norms was not to put people down, but it was to help a society and a community survive. And what I believe is we need to make masculinity, again, to reflect upon what does our culture and what does our society and what do our families, what do they need from us now? And let's try to be flexible as men and to reach out and do those things and to meet those needs that our society needs from us now. And certainly during COVID, what's needed from us may be different than what's needed in other times in our lives. And the last thing we try to stress is that it's everyone's responsibility and every man's responsibility to reduce domestic and sexual violence. And that's the other goal of our Men's Center, is how can we to communicate the idea that we as men are responsible to help reduce domestic violence and sexual violence, that's part of our role in the community. Thank you. I'm going to turn over to Lalit and to allow him to go ahead and give his presentation on violence and gender justice and injustice in South Asia. Lalit.
Thank you so much, John. So I'll be talking about on two aspects about what is happening in South Asia, and there are a lot of issues around gender justice and gender violence, but I may not be able to do justice to everything, but I want to give some overview about that and also touch upon what is happening briefly about South Asians in US, so which is more immediately relevant for our community. So looking at the interpersonal violence and sexual violence, WHO consider it as a major public health problem, and it is also issue of human rights for women. And looking at so the National Family Health Survey data in India, they conduct this data every 10 years or so. Almost 1/3 of the women face domestic violence at least one time in their life. So many times, and these are reported cases. And when we talk about domestic violence, it is not, it is different for different communities. So when we look at, when we talk about intersectionality, so it cut across different caste, class, and gender, but it disproportionately affects people, women who are most downtrodden, who are at the most down in these hierarchies of and the caste hierarchies. These domestic violence is also related to where what are the educational and income social indicators are. So when we look at India level, we have around 1.22 billion population, and if you look at South Asia, it is almost quarter of the world's population. Here, the female-male ratio, this is very important. As you see, the gender gap is huge, and it is not really progressing much, but there is preference for male child. So there are more male than female in Indian society, and there are cases of abortions when they find if it is girl at the time of pregnancy. And then the literacy ratio is really low. And when you look at the scheduled caste, they are like similar to African Americans. You can say people who are impacted by the caste, the ex-untouchability. So you can see there the social indicators on especially on literacy rate and the workforce participation. Infant mortality rate is really high there. Anemia is really high. So it is very different story of gender violence, gender discrimination, and this is the like a caste system in Indian society. And what we are looking at, this is not only in India, so it has the caste untouchability and the practice of the segregation and discrimination based on caste, and the gender has transmigrated globally. And this is Brahmin. So this is typically in Hindu religion. This is Brahmin. This is from Rigvedic literature, the Vedas, that Brahman took birth from the mouth of the Brahma. The Kshatriyas took birth from the arms of the Brahma, and the Vaishyas, the business caste, and the Shudras. The untouchable caste, or the Dalits, so-called Dalits, are at the bottom rung. So why we are looking at this? Because this is how Indian society function. And you may come across in India, we really appreciate like arranged marriages, which are quite glamorized, but arranged marriages are nothing but to preserve the caste, in how to make this caste intact. And essentially this has been there for like more than around 2000 or more, 3000 years. And so the modern religion, like be it Sikhism or Islam or any other religion, it comes from this, like Hinduism was the original religion. So all other religions follow similar trend. So you'll have this caste based segregation. And also we look at some of the religious texts which sanctions those caste based and gender stereotypes. So there is very famous book called Manusmriti, which is similar to social kind of constitution, which regulates how the book talks about how women should behave, what are their limitations, how she should practice her ethics, how she should not talk to other person, how she should not get educated, she should not work outside, things like that. And it is coming from a lot of religious dogmas. I think in the beginning, John mentioned that not a lot of things are coming by religion or other sanctified law, but some of the other culture talks about, like especially in Indian context, those comes from religious dogmas. And it is very much, you can see, practiced. So what is ideal woman? So there is a lot of stereotypes being told through religion, and it is very difficult to question when it comes to religion. So this is quite long back, 1947, when we were getting independence. So that time, this person on the right, you can see Dr. Ambedkar, he tried to build upon this Hindu Code Bill, which is about women's equality bill. In US also, we are talking about ERA equality amendment, which is still pending. But in Indian Constitution, men, women are equal, unlike US. But still, I think social, in reality, on paper it is they are equal, but in reality, so this is 1947. There was a lot of opposition to bring this women's equality bill. And we look at, this is very recent pictures during COVID, how people are coming on the streets fighting for equal justice for women. So there has been, so the gender violence is there within household, also outside household. So there has been cases of rape, violence, especially against the lowest caste, the untouchable caste. And there has been a lot of like protest outside. And this has been there every year. It has been increasing. And these are, this is 2020 case of Hathras, where a woman was publicly raped. And I like the presentation on trauma, betrayal, like how state has been sanctioning this. So that's rather than like for the rights of the victim, they have been like supporting the perpetrator. So they said, especially in this case recently, last month or so, and they said after like 3 weeks after this case, all the media was saying it was like fake news. And then when people started protesting, they got to know there was a lot of huge protest nationally. And then they said there is no rape because there was no evidence. So the public official came in media and they said there is no rape. But they found this girl brutally raped. The people found her So her tongue was cut, and she was from one of the ex-untouchable caste. And this violence is happening not only among the lower caste, but also among high caste, and especially in urban cities as people are migrating. There has been many cases. This picture is about when all over India, when they stopped, like they closed down everything. So for months, these laborers in urban cities were stuck, and they had no money to stay. They did not have anything to survive, and the government did not make any arrangement for their travels. So they stopped all the public transports like trains and everything. So people were on the street for like 15-20 days reaching to their homes. Like you can imagine people coming from example Chicago to down south, just walking on the road. And I don't know how we can define this as interpersonal violence. You can imagine what may be happening with this woman and also the men, and the responsibility of state is quite horrible. Especially when we look at the data, some of the data, what was happening, you can see, and these are reported cases. The National Commission, the last lines, National Commission for Women in India registered 861 cases, which is, you cannot believe it, it is quite underestimated. But you can see the number of calls which this Childline India Foundation got, like more than like usual. So, and this is in Nepal, 37% of the respondents, when they conducted survey, experience more violence, and more than women. So children got a lot of impacted during this. So the UN, they called this is like a shadow pandemic, especially the gender-based violence. And as some of you have highlighted how this online abuse has increased, people are getting more into social media, trying to get connected and trying to put a lot of like chats and all. And some of the gender justice advocacy work has been hampered due to the lockdown, especially the early child marriages or forced marriages. So the government cannot intervene. The police are focus on COVID and other stuff. So a lot of gender justice, social equality, all those areas get sidelined. So looking at some of the things, what is happening in US. So people who are immigrated here, so they face a lot of, especially in the current times, a lot of threats about racism. There's a lot of issues around power and control using immigration status, because they are, especially women are in work, they come on dependent visa. So there is a lot of undocumented cases. So out of fear that their husband may be arrested, so they want to just shut and just survive somehow. But across like Sikhism or Hinduism or across religion, we tend to talk about like just we need to have cultural sensitivity about other population. I think we need to be aware about there is a lot of violence among South Asian, and we need to be very mindful of those. And especially, and there has been some support, like this EU visa is there, and also I think there are certain agencies which address these issues. And this movie is really good if you are interested. This is from Karanjit Ahluwalia, the quite interesting case in UK of Indian immigrant, and it became like case law. Out of this sexual, physiological and other violence, she had for self-defense, she killed her husband, and she was put behind the bars, and she fought the case. The social welfare agencies fought her case, and it became some case law for self-defense, how one can protect themselves. And this is an organization in Portland which works with South Asian women. So you can take note of this agency if you come across any sensitive cases. Thank you so much. And
Thank you, Lalit. That was very, very interesting. And it's interesting to have an outside perspective from our country and look at somewhere else, and hopefully we can gain more insight and knowledge for not only about you but about and your country, your home country, but ourselves as well. Very, 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 very interesting. Yeah. Well, at this point, let's go ahead and move into our panel discussion. And I'm going to ask each one of our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their background in the field, and what brings them here tonight, and any particular points they want to make here now. And I'm going to start with Martina. Martina, can you?
Sure. I'm happy to jump in. Hello, everyone. I'm Martina Shabram from SASS. Really delighted to be here and to get to chat with you all and to learn from our wonderful presenters. It was all very, very interesting. So I work for Sexual Assault Support Services, SASS. I'm one of our survivor advocates, and I also run our education and outreach program. So I spend a significant portion of my time training professionals and the public to better support survivors and in sexual violence prevention. I come from a background in teaching sexual health education. I worked for Planned Parenthood for a number of years, where I also ran our youth group, which was called, or their youth group, which is called REV. And I earned my doctorate at UO in 2015. My field was literature, but my research area is disability studies and medical bias. So I spent a lot of my time thinking about the ways that institutions and systems treat subjects within them, and specifically treat the bodies of subjects within them. Do you want me to introduce SASS briefly as well, John?
Sure, sure. Yeah, why don't you do that?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing a lot of folks here are familiar with SASS. We've been around since 1991. SASS supports survivors of all genders. We offer a lot of different support services. We run a 24/7 crisis and support line. We have 24-hour emergency medical advocacy. Right now, because of COVID, that's happening on the phone, which I am happy to talk about later how much that sucks. We also help support survivors accessing legal services. We have had counseling, although we've just had our counselor transition, and so we're in a little bit of a transitional stage there. We have support groups, and all of our support groups are running online right now. And in addition to like sort of general support groups, we have one for folks who identify as members of the queer community, one for folks who identify as women or who have been perceived as women. We are also running skill building groups starting in December, and I run Healthy Sexuality for Survivors programming. So there's a lot of work that we do, and I'm going to just quickly into the chat put our crisis and support hotline information, just because, you know, I know a lot of us do this as our work and this is our everyday, and sometimes we don't expect to be hit by things the way that we might suddenly feel. So if anybody, you know, is feeling the need for some advocacy or is, you know, feeling some activation after this discussion, that crisis and support hotline is there not only for folks who are in acute crisis, but also folks who are experiencing vicarious trauma and work with survivors. So that's there for all of us. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Martina. Gwyn, why don't you fill us in a little more about yourself and about Womenspace there?
Yeah, of course. I introduced my role briefly. So Womenspace has multiple co-located advocates at DHS, the Oregon Law Center, also known as Legal Aid, and then I'm at the Domestic Violence Clinic at the University of Oregon. It's an opportunity for law students to practice working with survivors under a licensed attorney. And as the advocate there, I am the first point of contact for referrals. We work on a referral system, and because of grant funding, we have requirements to serve low-income folks, and so I am the first point of contact. I help screen them and assess their needs and safety plan and offer wraparound services, and just in general try to help them navigate a complex legal system that can often be overwhelming and help connect them to free legal advice or representation.
Thank you. Thank you. Brandy?
Okay, hi. Again, my name is Brandy, and You know, for 40 years, like I said in the start of our own individual presentation, we've been providing this real groundwork for survivors for not only empowerment, but we truly do believe that everybody deserves to live a life free of fear. And the work that I
Absolutely.
do at Womenspace is currently I'm the communications and development coordinator. And so it's essentially important for me at Womenspace to work with our team in developing programs and outreach to essentially everyone in Lane County. How can we plant seeds in all of these little community organizations that can really grow and flourish so that we can help stop this epidemic that we're all experiencing in our own individual communities. And on top of that, I also am now supervising the emergency service program as well as the crisis and support program. So I deal and talk with and support survivors on a daily basis, whether or not that's just the basic needs type things that they may need, assisting into getting stable housing, jobs, fleeing, setting up safety plans so that they can leave their abusers in a safe way, answer crisis lines, just pretty much everything. I'm the go-to person at this point. So that brings me to these presentations, talking to the radio about what COVID looks like for survivors and beyond. So
Brani, I had a question. Somebody approached me the other day about a family member who was a young adult who was in an abusive relationship, and the family member, the relative, was trying to think about ways that could intervene in some kind of way or be most helpful. And I referred him to you guys, but is that something you do, like consult with family members? Is that something you do fairly frequently?
Of course, we get survivors, family members, friends, grandparents, other concerned community members calling our crisis line on a daily basis.
Okay.
And really, the number one piece of advice that I can give anyone is being a support person, because I think by nature, a lot of us, especially for people who showed up to this Zoom call, you know, we don't want to see pain. You know, we want to save.
Absolutely.
By nature, we want to do that, but that's not always the right thing to do when supporting a survivor. Most of the times, from what I've seen, is a survivor will most likely stay with their abuser because even if abuse is occurring, that person is a safe person to them in one way or another. And if a survivor were to come to me and say, Brandi, look, this is what's going on, and the first words that came out of my mouth was, well, why don't you just leave? It's just easy, just do it. You can find a job somewhere else. The kids can find another school. That's not successful. But what is successful is being that open ear and just saying, I see what you're going through and I can't imagine, but I'm here for you. And it really is that difference between empathy and sympathy.
Yes.
And so, I mean, we can go on about that in a different time, but it really just being there for that person. And if a survivor's that loved one were to call our crisis line, we could talk about ways to safety plan with them. And really a person who is that support person carries their own trauma. And so having a safe person like an advocate to be able to reach out to themselves is quite literally one of the most important things that we do.
Great. Thank you, Brandi. And Alexis.
Hello. So I sort of introduced myself before, but I'll just say a little bit more about that. So I am a doctoral student in clinical psychology at the U of O, and I work with Jennifer Fried, and our main our research focus is focused on interpersonal violence, and particularly the context of interpersonal violence and how that affects outcomes on trauma survivors. And the context can be the interpersonal context, who's committing the violence, as well as the societal and cultural context in which the violence occurs and how it may differentially impact survivors' outcomes. So we do research in that area. And then also I am a doctoral student therapist at the U of O Psychology Clinic, where we do evidence-based treatments for a wide range of presenting problems, including PTSD and things like that. And we actually operate on a sliding scale, so if anyone needs a referral for especially low-income people, we greatly encourage that. Yeah.
Thank you, Alexis. I'm going to go ahead and throw out some questions, and feel free as panelists to go ahead and respond to whatever questions sound most salient to you. Our first question tonight is, how has COVID affected the occurrence of domestic violence? So if any of the panel members want to jump into that.
I could say something. So how has it increased the occurrence?
Right,
Well,
right.
you know, essentially, what we've seen, especially in the beginning, I was actually asked this question in comparison to somebody who works at victim services. We didn't see it as far as legally. You know, that wasn't really shown until our current days, right? But we saw it in the work that we do every day. And that was because people weren't being seen. So these numbers, I think we're gonna be able to see that they're kind of skewed. So the reported cases went down at first. Everybody was saying, well, everybody must just be getting along, which we all know that doesn't exactly add up, right? So kids weren't being seen. Teachers weren't talking to them. People were at home working from home. I work part-time from home. And so when you're quite literally trapped in your own household, just all of us could probably relate to that, but also you're with your abuser, it is like a prison. It is a prison for children. And especially when you think of equity involved in situations like this and having access to resources and food, that's why we saw such an increase in our crisis line, because yes, you know, children had free access to food at different schools, but how do they get there? You know,
Right.
there were a lot of abuse situations surrounding COVID, and using that as a tactic of abuse. I'm going to poison your mask. We've heard that so much, and it's actually an incredibly, you know, emotionally taxing thing to think about. If you can't leave your own home because nobody has given you access to be able to do so, it's those little things that we continuously see build up. And when you have had a job loss, you haven't received your unemployment benefits, children are at home. I mean, I don't know how I get through the day with children going to school online as it is and being a working mom. So
Sure.
you add abuse into that factor. We've seen the numbers skyrocket as across the world, essentially.
Any other panelists want to respond to that?
Well, I guess I'll add that we're definitely seeing a really similar to what Womenspace is seeing. You know, significant drops in the amount of you know, hospital visits that we're having, because people are not going to the hospital as often. And that does not mean that assaults aren't happening. It just means that people are choosing not to go to a place that feels unsafe. We've also noticed, though, like some of the tenor of some of the calls are quite different. We've had a number of folks who have said at some point during a call that they, you know, that they like literally cannot find a safe place within their house to make a call. So I expect also that some of the numbers are going to really change just when people have access to like leaving their homes in a different way, because you know, you can't join a support group online when your abuser's in the other room, right?
Sure.
And there's been some different tactics, like Brandi said, using COVID as a tool. I've also seen a pretty marked increase in using housing as a coercive tactic. So a marked increase in people who are experiencing sexual violence within roommate situations, landlord situations, you know, who literally will have nowhere to go, and because of COVID would have been higher risk, or people who were in somewhat tenuous housing, and because of COVID no longer have that stability. And so there's, there's more survival sex happening. There's more coercion with housing happening. There's definitely a different, there's different tactics that have always existed but are maybe more prominent now.
Thank you, Martina. I'm going to jump to our third question here. Our country is facing not just one pandemic, but there's another larger pandemic that's been here for quite some time, the pandemic of racism. And I'm wondering, how is that, what is needed to ensure that populations of people of color, Black and other folks who've been marginalized, what do we need to ensure that they're getting the domestic violence prevention and support services that they need?
You can jump in again. So I can tell you a little bit about what Womenspace does, and as a person of color, engaging in competent conversations is important to me, but for our survivors, it's important to be able to reach out to smaller communities, especially our rural communities. We have a very large, South American and Guatemalan rural population that is right outside of Eugene. So when we think about these conversations, we need to also think about reaching those smaller populations of people. And so we do have an outreach team that goes out to our rural communities and connects. But it's a person that is familiar. So with our Latinx community, it is important to respect cultural boundaries. If it was my mother, she wouldn't necessarily be comfortable talking to a man because of her cultural and religious beliefs about a sexual assault. But it is important for us to be able to, as advocates, assist where the voice is less heard. Getting to a rural part of our areas, especially reaching the smaller groups, needs to be as big of a priority as it is somebody just walking into our office. And so that's education. So educating ourselves as advocates, as people of color. If you're not a person of color, it's all of us coming together and having these community conversations to make the stigma of being silent erase it. Essentially, we need to get rid of the silence and encourage competent conversations about cultures and what we can all really do, whether or not you're a person of color.
Thank you, Brandi. Any other thoughts on that question?
I have one additional thought. If the concept of this betrayal resonates with people, there's really good work by a scholar from the U of O, Jen Gomez, who's kind of expanded some of these ideas to talk about violence dynamics that occur within marginalized communities, between marginalized folks, and how that kind of additionally puts this difficult bind on a lot of marginalized communities, because there are some of these like stereotypes about particularly men of color, and this puts women of color, if they're experiencing violence, in a really difficult situation that perpetuates some of these stereotypes if they report to these institutions that they're kind of ratting out some of these people that are really important to buffer against some of the stresses of discrimination for one of their identities. And it's a difficult situation to navigate. So I definitely recommend, I'll put her name in the chat if people want to look her up. She talks a lot about this and is really, really into some of the nuanced dynamics of balancing the needs of all these different identities and experiences.
Yeah, she's a very dynamic individual. We've worked with her, and she's presented for us before. Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Alexis.
I'd also add that I think that there's a role that folks who have power within organizations like ours a responsibility that those folks have. You know, I think it's a really tough thing for many of us who are in this field. You know, most of us got into this field because we care about people, right? We're in the caring professions, the helping professions. And so it's really tough for us to sometimes encounter and cope with the ways that we cause harm. And that means that people
Yes.
in positions of
Yes.
power within our institutions need to be radically willing to examine the ways that our institutions are themselves oppressive.
Yes.
You know, it's really tough, you know, for SASS, for example, as an individual, and I'm not speaking for SASS's ideology on this, but as an individual, I believe in police abolition. I also work with law enforcement. That's a really hard thing to sometimes encounter and to deal with the sort of balance that takes. You know, I spend a lot of my time training professionals on how to take disclosures. And one of the things that I have to do every single time I have that conversation is talk about like what strategies people can use to not to not cause harm, but to cause the least amount of harm when they make mandatory reports, which are in and of themselves often huge betrayals. And so when we are working within systems that are also inherently oppressive, we have to work to mitigate that harm and know that that harm is experienced disproportionately by folks who are already in marginalized positions.
Yes.
So mitigate that harm and then also dismantle some of those things, right? So we should be working within our institutions to be figuring out different tactics, ways to advocate for different laws, ways to ensure that we're having equitable funding, ways to make sure that people whose voices are excluded are brought back to the table. And that honestly means doing some internal introspection and checking in on whether, you know, we are doing harm and whether our practices are harmful, which is really hard work.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eugene.
I just want to make a small point. So I think there are all these suggestions are extremely great. I think the organizations which works with BIPOC community, I think if they are more empowered, like there are more resources for them to address these issues rather than some other organizations where I found like people of color are more comfortable visiting their own organization rather than going somewhere else. Because I had one student who did some research on why people of color are not visiting this hospice or some agency, and they hired some inequity expert and firms. But if there is some hospice or whatever agency is there which is catering to the needs of those Latinx or whatever population, then they will be more comfortable. So similar, I think on domestic violence, like among South Asian, I think there is, and people who on different immigration status, if there is more awareness, maybe led by the community leaders themselves about what are the laws in this country, how it is different, how this culture is different here, what are the repercussions of it. Because when the police comes, that is the first time they get to know about the laws. So I think on preventative mechanism, there can be a lot can be done. Especially because even if women want to file case, or because I personally seen some of the cases where even women did not want to file case, but police just came and they just took the husband away because they saw some blood or something like that, and it is beyond the so nothing, nobody can do anything. Like women cannot do, men cannot do, and she is at her own. And that is the first time she is coming out of home, dropping her son to the school or something. So she was like in the household for all the time. I think some of the especially in Canada, they have a lot of provisions for immigrants when they, especially for dependent spouses, about their household empowerment. So there are a lot of things where they try to get empowered when this like sudden strikes comes up. So I think on preventative awareness front, we can do a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lalit. We're running short of time, and I want to get the audience involved. So we can either, I think we can either, and I appreciate any feedback here, but we can either break up into small groups now, or we can just turn it over to the audience's questions and comments and respond to them. What do you think would be most effective given the time we have left?
I would say questions, just because a lot of times the breakdowns don't seem to work that well.
It may take us a while to get situated and stuff. Okay,
Uh-huh.
how do you feel about doing that? Are you guys okay with that?
I just launched a poll if everyone wants to vote without having to publicly voice, but
Okay.
Okay.
all right, we have majority question and answer, not breakout rooms.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Oh, I'm going to turn it over to the audience then, and let's whoever wants to ask a question of anybody or throw it out there generally, please do.
I have a question because I came up with a lot of questions. So my question is around course of control. And I know that like England, Wales, and Scotland in the past few years are finally like they penalized course of control. So someone can get, I think, up to 5 years in prison if course of control is determined in that case. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts about that are for having that same measure, that same policy here in the United States, and how you see that impacting the domestic violence cases and maybe even people coming forward and self-reporting.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you. That's an excellent question. Any thoughts on that?
I have some thoughts. I would say in general, especially when responding to domestic violence, our court system is very reactive, not preventative. And that causes problems in and of itself where you have to wait for multiple things to happen before, for example, you can get a restraining order. So I think there could be pros and cons to focusing on emotional abuse and coercive control, because often we work with people who get the restraining order applications denied because there's a lot of emotional abuse, but it just doesn't meet that standard set. And so I could see an advantage to an emotional abuse protective order and granting that protection. I don't know that it'd be preventative though, because at the end of the day, it's just reacting to an issue, and I don't think it would help prevent it, because at the end of the day, abusers don't care about the law most of the time, and they don't care about the consequences, but at least there'd be some recourse for those experiencing that kind of abuse.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you that I don't think folks, I don't think that folks stop engaging in abusive behavior because they're afraid of getting punished, and so laws can be effective in ending situations that are already harmful, but I don't think that they necessarily prevent situations. I do think that there's an important rhetoric in, saying clearly that certain behaviors are outside of the collective norm or outside of what we collectively believe is appropriate, and in being able to name those things so that then people who are experiencing that can recognize themselves in those names. And my bias is on display here. I think that there's as much power in doing that in education as there is in doing that through law. And I'm probably always going to fall down on the side of like throwing way more resources and support into education than into law enforcement. But again, that's my personal bias.
I just wanted to add, in a lot of these cases, it's been used, first of all, for as a defense when the survivors were somehow got involved and were being charged with criminal charges because they tried to defend themselves. So it was used as a way to show that they were, indeed, the abuse caused them to defend themselves, basically. And the other part was, because I get about the restraining order, but that's civil case, and this was actually done in criminal, which is, it carries a higher penalty. Civil law is, if they break the restraining order, they get arrested, otherwise they don't. But for what I understand, this law was so people could come forward and show a pattern of abuse. The way that they see it, it is kind of a preventative measure, because then the person can be taken off the streets and not further out there perpetrating. So it wouldn't be like you get this and then we wait until you do something to arrest you, but it's like immediately after the person is taken off the streets.
And I agree with you on that, what you just said right now, that invoked something, because when we work with survivors, we even, I mean, this isn't something that is secret, but we've worked with a survivor who just in the very beginning of this pandemic was killed by her husband. And how we see abuse most of the time, we can predict that things will escalate. So everybody's perfect in the beginning, whether you're male, female, you know, it's the one thing an abuser is the best at is being an abuser. And so that's where the manipulation and the coercion and all of that starts. It's that one random act where somebody, some very traumatic thing happens. And then it becomes the forgiveness. And then it becomes the drawing back in. And then you can see this escalating. And sometimes people can't make it out by the time it gets here. And I agree about, I respect the law and I respect humanity, and so I don't commit crimes. I mean, that's just who I am as a person. Laws don't mean anything, but if we had a way to be able to protect survivors before it starts to get all the way up here, before it gets to this point where it might be life or death, I think that we can make a lot of change and we can take a lot of action, especially in our communities. So I do agree with you. I think that having protections for survivors before it gets to that point, before they end up in the hospital or they end up in a grave, that's what we can do to help support survivors in stopping it before it escalates to a point of possibly no return.
And John, I see some questions in the chat. Would you like me to start reading some of
Yeah,
those?
well, yeah, why don't you do that? Yeah. Mhm.
All right, the first one's from Michael. It says, the political environment is fraught with anger. How do we explore, or should we explore, this topic with clients to help them understand that their political anger may be contributing to violence taken out on family members?
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there can be anger coming from any reason. It may not be necessarily from political environment. Without political environment also, so whatever may be happening outside or I think at workplace or other place, so there is, it doesn't justify. I was looking at one nice like short clip, like how one anger leads to another. But I think on like there has been a lot of, I think, intervention, especially cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness, where how you can control your own whatever is going on, rather not necessarily. And I don't think if something is happening outside, you put those anger with someone outside at workplace or other people. So there will be repercussion, you know that, but it is not, it doesn't, that threat or kind of fear is not there when it comes at home.
To second that sentiment, violence is not an anger issue within most domestic violence relationships. It's a control issue. So they may be mad and taking out violence on their family, but then someone knocks on the door and they can dissipate that anger. So yes, there may be angry outbursts, but they're often as a way to control.
Any other thoughts on that question? Paul, did you?
Oh, yeah, I'd just like to say, going back to what John said about anxiety as a men's issue that can lead to wanting to control, what you were talking about. And I see that a lot. Like Gwyn said, it's probably not a lot of anger, but a lot of men are feeling out of control right now. And I noticed this, I see this just by going out and talking to people and seeing them, you know, that it's coming out in a lot of different ways. Like if, like disagreements with customer service, this or that. So I don't know where I was going with that, but that was just my.
Interesting point, Paul. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Other thoughts? Other questions?
Here's another question. What about threats of or violence against pets at home as part of domestic violence control during COVID?
Can you read that one more time, Gwen? I was trying to find it, but I was
Yeah, I
responding.
can't find it. Yeah.
Private. I was responding
Near the
to.
top. What about threats of violence against pets during coronavirus?
I can talk about that just from experience. I mean, I hate to admit that we've received that call many times. That's that power and control, right? So I might not necessarily put my hands on you, but to isolate the one thing that you love most, and for a lot of us, oftentimes it's our pets. To take the anger out in that way is a way to show control and to be able to, navigate that anger. Of course, if anybody hears about those sorts of actions, we have safety plans that an advocate can talk to a survivor about, even for pets. And we have resources available to be able to assist somebody in keeping also their pet safe. But it's obviously not about the pet. It's a way to show anger and violence in an abuser's choice that isn't necessarily having an impact to the survivor's body. It is used more often than I'd like to talk about. That's for sure.
Yeah. You know, I wonder if we can focus for the last couple of minutes here on what we as community members and as professionals can do to prevent domestic violence. And so anyway, I wonder if we can respond to thinking about that.
I have a question about safety planning during COVID and like what kind of techniques you would recommend when you can't use the traditional methods of safety planning, when people don't have access to their support network or to a private phone they can use at work, or any of the kind of normal things that we would use to make a safety plan in a family.
Good question.
So I think for each individual, it looks a lot different. So if you're the support person for a family, so you're the representative of maybe the household, or you're the survivor yourself, those sorts of things. I think that the first step is, if you don't have a support system, Womenspace and there are other agencies that you can call, especially for Womenspace. You can call us 24 hours a day, and we can individualize a safety plan, because I think that's also very important. And sometimes those safety plans need to be revisited and revised throughout the time of whatever it is that you're going through. So sometimes that looks like fleeing. Sometimes that means that you have a disruptive custody agreement with your abuser. And so I think it's important to note that everybody is different. And so to be able to have somebody to talk to individualize a plan for everyone is something that a Womenspace advocate can do over our crisis line. But generally speaking, because adjusted services are so prevalent in our community because of COVID, half of us are working from home, half of us are working in the office, or there's a mashup. Everything looks different. So even having a safety plan sometimes can seem a little bit daunting on where do I go. And so that's why it's not an easy thing to answer. And the best that I can do is encourage whoever it is that is in need of that safety plan to call an agency and have something individualized for them.
And to add to that, if you're a support person, you can generate codes. So maybe their abuser shares their phone or monitors their phone. If there's a rare moment where they call you and the abuser's not around, talk about a code word. Like if you say, hey, can I bring the kids over? That really means I need you to call the police, or I need you to do this thing. You can have code phrases to make it safe to communicate with someone, but make sure they believe it's safe. And I do notice that Ariane has his hands raised, so I would like him to have an opportunity to ask his question.
Thank you, Gwen, and thank you to all the panelists for the great presentation so far. I really especially appreciate the focus on, or the high emphasis on prevention, and also John's point about, you know, while men are certainly survivors of domestic violence, and that not all men are violent, the vast majority. I think this, for the statistics that I've seen, over 90% of perpetrators of domestic violence are people that identify as men. And so I'm sort of lifting the question from sort of the discussion questions that we had previously, but, you know, especially, you know, while I always wish to see more male identifying folks, especially for the men and the leaders in sort of male identifying communities that are on this call, what do we need to see from us to help sort of, reduce the incidence of these experiences in our communities?
For me, I think the first thing is to recognize that it is our responsibility as men. And certainly the men here tonight are showing up and are getting involved here. And I really appreciate that. And I think that's one of the things we need to do. We need to be sure that our own relationships are as healthy as they can be, and are free of undue control or anything like that. I think we can look for ways of how we can support Womenspace and SASS and other organizations in town that support domestic violence prevention, and get involved with that. If you can volunteer, and that's at a different time. I know right at this moment volunteering is not an option because of the COVID, but I think in the future, I think those opportunities will be there. Or if you can donate money to help out, I think that's very important. But I think the main thing is to look at ourselves and to examine on ways in which we might contribute to issues about domestic violence. Are there parts of our behavior, our beliefs that are sexist, and how can we take a look at that? These are some of the things, some of the many different things that we look at in some of our group activity and stuff. So getting involved with other men and talking about some of these issues and developing an awareness of how we can both be part of the solution, and also maybe sometimes we can be, part of the issue with some of the beliefs we've been giving. How does our own socialization impact us in both positive and negative ways? We've got to encourage younger men to feel comfortable with seeking help and accepting help, and to do that by creating safe places where men can come and boys can come and be together. And then we also need role models of men out there who are involved in violence prevention and who stand up and speak out and take action when we're trying to reduce violence. And certainly, again, everybody in this room, I think all the men in this room are doing something by coming today and showing their support for this type of organization. That's taking a step in a positive way. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. I'd be interested to hear other people's.
Well, I guess I want to put my my bias on display again and say that I think that education is one of our most powerful tools, and one of the things that's tough about that is that sometimes the thing that feels best as a person who wants to be involved and who wants to do good in the world is like direct action. You know, we get a lot of people who call at SASS and want to volunteer and like specifically want to work directly with survivors. And that's really great. And that may not actually always be the best use of that person's time. Or the best use of our time as an agency to supervise and support that. And that can be so frustrating for people to be told something like, you know, we're so appreciative of the energy you want to bring to this. And also, what we would really like is your money. That's not a satisfying thing to hear. It's also not satisfying sometimes to hear that like one of the best things we can do is advocate for better laws. And when I'm talking about that, I don't just mean like, you know, better criminal justice laws. I mean like better laws around education. In the state of Oregon, we have some of the best sex education in the country. We also don't have any money for it. So we have Aaron's Law, which mandates consent education at every grade level, but there's no money behind that. It's an unfunded mandate, which means that school districts are legally required to have Aaron's Law presentations, 4 one-hour presentations each year at every grade level. But there's no money or support really to generate those things, to train instructors to do those things. And so we have this great law and we don't really have any way to make it to meet its potential. So one of the wonderful things that people can do from their positions of power is to advocate for better funding for schools, right? Advocate for better support for teachers to be able to talk about these things. And again, that's so unsatisfying sometimes, but we really need to think about playing the long game on this, right? Like teaching a classroom of kindergartners about bodily autonomy is not going to have an immediate effect on DV and SA rates, right? But it will in 20 years. And so we have to be willing to play the long game and to invest in the long game with literally invest with money, which is not the satisfying answer people want to hear. But I do think it's some of the most impactful work that we can do to create that long-term change.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you. Other thoughts?
I worked for 8 years in a residential treatment center with at-risk youth, and that's some of the most severe domestic violence I've ever been around or encountered. And I just wanted to bring that up because there's been a lot of focus on adults, and I was just curious when it comes to Womenspace and SASS, what kind of services are available for children?
Excellent question, Colton.
I can talk a little bit. Oh, go ahead, Gwyn.
So we have a youth team. Before COVID, they were able to work hands-on with the children during support groups. They watched the children and taught them things, gave them support and activities. Now it looks more like parenting classes for the adults to know how to respond to children who are dealing with trauma. It can be a lot of acting out. They can seem like difficult children, when in reality, they're children who have experienced things that they never should have had to experience. So educating the parents on how to address it, and then connecting them with local resources and with counseling, depending on their age and development levels, are just some of the things that we do.
Oh, that sounds so amazing. I wish that we had the capacity to do some more of that. SASS really struggles with this. Technically, we serve folks age 15 years old and older. And an important thing to throw in here is that at SASS, all of our advocates are privileged advocates, which means that we are like the inverse of mandatory reporters, and that includes for minors. And I think that's a really important thing. Many young folks do not disclose to trusted adults in their life because they know that a report will be made. And so having a place to send them where they can talk through their options and talk about oftentimes what a report would look like and what the outcome might be, so that they can make a choice to disclose to a different kind of trusted adult is a really good resource. But we don't serve folks who are younger. So for sexual assault survivors who are under 15, we refer out typically to Kids First. And for that 15 to 18 window there, that transitional age youth group, there really aren't as many services. Our counseling and support groups are for folks 18 years and older because of funding restrictions. And that's a really big bummer because something like 20% of teens experience dating violence. And huge numbers of teens experience sexual violence and sexual harassment, especially within their school environment. So I think that this is a place where, like, as a field, we really need to dig in and do some more work on providing funding and making it possible for there to be more folks who are not mandatory reporters who are doing that work. Not because I don't think that, like, reporting is always bad, but because kids are just not going to reach out often if they know that the police might get called. And so we, like, have to carve out some space for that, and that is not something that's not politically palatable for a lot of folks.
We're coming very close to the end of the evening. I want to thank all our speakers, all our panelists, and all our people that put in a lot of work to their small groups that unfortunately were not able to happen. Particularly I want to thank Alex for all her work on identifying questions. And I'm hoping that we can, at a later date, offer another maybe more specific event where we can talk about some of these issues in more detail and strategies. But I really appreciate people coming tonight. I appreciate all the presentations were extremely interesting, and I just want to thank you all who for participating in whatever way you did. So and thank you all for coming. Any last words from either our audience or our panelists or presenters?
I just want to say thank you, and please continue conversations like this with each other, with your families at the dinner table. It's important. The more we talk about it, the more we can chip away at the stigma. So I appreciate this, and I'm sure everybody has learned something today. I surely have. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other final thoughts or anything?
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, John, for organizing this. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you, Lalit, and again, thanks to everyone for coming and for presenting and being a part of this. Again, we all need to be working together and pulling together and having these discussions, and hopefully we can sponsor another event and see what we can do to really kind of hone down some more specific ideas about creating a safer community for all of us. Again, thank you so much to everybody. And